Okay, so well, thank you for coming and thank you for lasting till the end of the day, almost. My name is Richard Silburn. I'm the Director of the English Language Centre at Manchester Metropolitan University. I should be accompanied by... Oh, you guys, come in. It's all right, I'm just introducing myself so you know who I am. You haven't missed anything. I was just saying I should be accompanied by my colleague Caroline, who unfortunately can't make it today, so apologies on her behalf. What I want to talk about today, and I'm a little bit unsure about the title of this, because the first thing a few people have asked me is about employability. I'm talking about graduate employability. Not employability for EAP staff. Yeah, yeah. So if you've read the abstract, then your employability for us in a few years' time. The other bit I wasn't quite sure about is the beyond language. I wasn't sure sort of about to call it beyond language, beyond EAP, or for some reason beyond genre. I don't know why I got it in my head, because there's a sort of subtext to this, and it's around the role of EAP, and that I think it needs to kind of expand beyond its traditional remits and to embrace or re-embrace other areas. And that, I think, is a good way of having, to go back to the plenary, a knowledge base that we can use to speak to our institutions and advocate for our disciplines. There's kind of a secondary theme within it. So I'll start off and talk about, I think the phrase the expansion of TNE, or the rapid expansion of TNE, has probably been the number one today. I'll talk briefly about that, but I want to focus in specifically on employability, so graduate employability for TNE graduates. Then I'll look at some sort of theoretical frameworks that in order to sort of situate the projects that we've been doing, and I'll give you some examples of a COIL project, which means collaborative online international learning. And then finally think about how that informs the work we're doing for a future large-scale TNE curriculum that we've been working on. Okay, so there you go. As we all know from earlier on today, the new educational strategy has really foregrounded TNE. There's a very ambitious target there of 40 billion per year. We focused a lot on China, but this is just last year. There are 122 new UK-China partnerships approved in 2025. I think the year before it was about 25 or 30. So I'm not entirely sure, but it's a significant jump in the rate of approval. I suspect in the next couple of months there'll be quite a few more that will have been approved. Whilst there is obviously a big focus on China, the growth of TNE it's kind of global. There's lots of other countries. You've seen in the media, there's lots of talk about universities opening up campuses in India, for example. And the other thing I wanted to make a point of is like this is quite UK focused, but the growth in TNE is not just about the UK and other partners. It's about universities from all around the world. So it's quite a global phenomenon. And I think that's important. So for us, in many ways, this is a positive thing and it's to be welcomed. But there's another side to it as well. There's increased competition. So in some ways, we're potentially in competition with other universities within the UK. We're also in competition with other universities not from the UK. Of all of the new and proposed TNEs that are now kind of on the horizon, it would be fair to say that not all of them are going to be successful. So I think we all know within this community that not TNEs are not always successful. They possibly have quite a high failure rate. That means, I think, that there's going to be an increasing scrutiny of things like the student experience, graduate outcomes, the extent to which these are coherently implemented within the institutions and within the programme. And in some ways, that's a good thing for EAP, because it presents us with an opportunity to play a central role in the future success of those institutions. Central in all of this, I think, is employability. I'm going to just briefly talk a little bit about myself, because I don't think this is new. So before I joined Manchester Met, I was head of the English Language Centre in University of Nottingham in Ningbo, China. And I was there for quite a long time. I actually started working there in 2006, so 20 years ago. Actually had long hair, believe it or not. I've got pictures to prove it. When I first went there, I taught a business English module for final year students that was really geared towards, graduate employability. So that was 20 years ago when that was happening. In 2014, I went to Leicester. What do I need a drink? It's not a dramatic pause. I went to Leicester because there was a Bar Leap conference in Leicester, 2014, is that right?
Yeah.
Around that time. And the presentation I gave was about a project called Students of Agents of Change, which was a big thing in Nottingham University at that time. But it was really led by the English Language Centre, and it was around co-creation of the curriculum, involving the students and student voice, and that was one part of it. But another big part of it was developing graduate attributes. So you can see the relationship between EAP, TNE and employability has been going on for some time. So it's not a new thing, but I think that the changes that I've described previously mean that this is going to come under increasing scrutiny, it's going to become increasingly important. And so I also think that sometimes it's not done in a kind of linear and joined up fashion. If you look in the literature, what there is around employability, they always kind of advocate that employability should be explicit, it should be integrated into the curriculum, and it should be done consistently throughout the curriculum. There's also a lot of positives that come out of TNE graduates and things that we might expect that they would have advantages in the labour market in terms of their language communication ability, intercultural awareness, the idea of a global citizen or the global perspective, and that's valued. But then there's the however part of it. There's a lot of concerns as well, and these relate to things like not having an understanding of the local employment context in the same way that local graduates may do, not being geared from their educational experience to the local employment labour market in the same way that home institutions may be. And then the other thing is that it's a very uneven playing field. So if you think about the full range of TNE, EMI institutions and the range of different countries, it's going to be very different in each sort of locality, and there'll be a lot of different contexts, so it's quite hard to compare one to another. So the idea of employability for TNE graduates, it's quite uneven when you analyse it. At the more extreme end of it, and you can again see the final quote, it's actually quite old. That's very specifically talking about Hong Kong. And there's an argument that TNE graduates are in some ways disadvantaged compared to their local counterparts. And that's essentially maybe for two reasons. It's often the case that they are perceived to be academically weaker than from some of the more established institutions. And if you look at on the online talks, as a guy from, I think he's a PhD student from Warwick, he's been doing sort of research into why students choose to study in JEIs in China, and he's got some quite interesting data there. So you can access it online, but he shows, for example, that the Gaokao entry requirements are lower often for the JEI than they are for the partner institution. And he also talks about the reasons why students choose to study there, and that's perhaps not clear. So if you put that together, that you can see how that may impact on their future graduate employability. The other thing that impacts on this is that TNEs by their nature are relatively new. So they lack the social and cultural capital that more established institutions may have, particularly within that local employment context. So I mean, I talked about working for UNNC and going back, 20 years, 26 years? 20 years, but 20 years in university terms is not very old, is it? So having, if you're competing against graduates from institutions that have been there for like 50, 60, 100 years and really have that kind of reputation and social cultural capital and are very well established in the employment markets within that particular country, then you can see there's quite a bit of ground to be made up. So there is a challenge there, and I think the point I would like to make is that I think that EAP provision and English language education in general has a role to play in addressing this. So it's difficult to make assumptions or draw conclusions across TNE as a whole, but what we can do is look maybe more specifically about the students. So rather than thinking in terms of what do we need in this specific context, we can think about what attributes should we provide the students with once they graduate. So this is a model of graduate capital by Tomlinson. I think it's at the University of Southampton. Being a good EAP teacher, I'm not going to read all the things out from the slide. I'll let you absorb it. But what I hope you would notice is that there's quite a lot of parallels there, the knowledge, the competencies and the skills that you can see identified under the different sections. You could map them to the aims and objectives from an EAP programme, I think. There's a definite link there, I feel. I'm also particularly interested in the idea of identity capital and the ability to the students need, or graduates need, sorry, to be able to articulate the career narrative in the way that they need to do that, in the way that the employers can understand. And if you think about it in the TNE context, that also means that they probably need to be able to do that in 2 languages. So it's considerably more of a burden upon them, isn't it? So the next kind of theoretical framework that I wanted to use is probably one that you're much more familiar with, and it's ICC, or Intercultural Communicative Confidence, and it comes from sort of Byram's work. Byram has the actual framework he has 5 components, and there are different, they're called savoir for reasons I don't quite remember. But yeah, if you're interested in that and you haven't come across it before, it's worth having a look at. I'm not going to go into it today because I thought we only had 20 minutes, so I probably could have put it in there actually. But I was interested in some of the aspects that he draws upon, so you can see that these things, again, you could map them back to the graduate capital model, and you could map that back again to the kind of things that competencies that we'd be trying to teach on EAP programs. And then the third, it's not really a framework, I would describe it as an enabling tool, and this is like Collaborative Online International Learning, or COIL, as it's known. Are you all familiar with this, or have you come across it? It seems to be having its day, isn't it? I think like sort of post-COVID, the movement towards like online learning seems to be like a big growth in COIL. So within our university, within our school and within our faculty in particular, we've been quite big advocates of COIL as a way of building international partnerships. It's one advantage of it. It has a very, because it's online nature, it offers a very accessible means to build community in the TNE context. So often in the TNEs, you have the kind of the overseas students and the home students, and the 2 are separated. The challenge is to try and build a community between the 2 groups. So that's not quite what I'm talking about today, but it does have this other advantage of being able to do that. The other thing that it introduces is the idea of digital collaboration, developing digital literacy skills. You know, if you go back to graduate capital and the kind of skills that students need, we live in the digitally mediated world and the digitally mediated university. So this is a good way of exposing students to what that means in real terms and actually being able to develop their literacy and competencies. And the final advantage that it has as a means of sort of developing collaboration and building employability is that it's often co-designed and co-taught. So it brings together, you know, people. If you think about a home campus and an overseas campus, it could link the 2 together. You could think about EAP as a module, and then the sub-content as a module, so you can link together things in this way. You can design things in a way so that they're kind of asymmetrical as well, and you can also, you don't have to have like necessarily an even match between students on either side. So if you have less one students on one side and more on the other, you can design the kind of COIL project so that they can both be involved in it. And the other thing it has, the other advantage within the curriculum is that it's really up to you about how you integrate it into the module. So there are a lot of choices that you can make. It could be fully integrated into a module or a program over a long period of time. It could be left more over to the students to facilitate. It could be assessed, it could not be assessed. So there's a lot of flexibility, which means it's very adaptable in a lot of contexts, and that's very useful within TNE, isn't it? Okay, so coming back to this, in order, I think, to kind of link all of these things together and to build a more consistent approach to developing graduate attributes, we maybe need to think about what is the role of EAP and what's the knowledge base that we have and how can we use this in a slightly different way. In my simple mind, EAP actually, I think, focuses on these three things, really. It's academic literacies and the development of, which is a vast and complex area, but we could summarise it as that. There's always a focus on language proficiency, I think, and we are at heart kind of, you know, experts in language education. I think sometimes we shouldn't forget that. And then it's geared towards, you know, engaging with a particular discourse community. I think that we need to kind of think about how to expand the EAP to include these areas as well. Now, I would also say that some of these things are already happening, and that you know, if you could conceptualise any kind of EAP programme as having a focus on something like intercultural communication. I know that there are EAP programmes where they're trying to link competencies and outcomes directly to graduate attributes. What I think happens is it often occurs within the constraints of the particular programme, and it doesn't maybe go beyond that. It doesn't reach far enough out into the world beyond, and it needs to have more measurable and demonstrable impact. So it leads us to, well, how can we approach this? So I have the phrase EAP-led curriculum design. So when myself and Caroline, were discussing putting in a paper for this conference, we were talking about some of the work we were doing. Caroline said, well, the thing is, I'm not sure if this is really EAP. And I sort of said, yeah, I think that's the point. Because you can have curriculums and you can have projects that have an element of EAP but actually have other focuses. You can also have modules that are focused more on English language communication. They're kind of ESP in a way, but that's still related to EAP. It's still led by the English Language Centre. It's still led by EAP practitioners. And you can have EAP built into modules that are taught primarily by content specialists, but also focused on graduate attributes. But the design of the modules has been led in some way by the EAP practitioners. So that's the way that you can start to embed these kind of things into the curricula in general, and then COIL-based international collaboration, and directly linking intercultural communication tasks to work integrated learning. So in order to explain that, I'll now give you a kind of an example. So that, this is a COIL project that we ran with a partner institution in Egypt. So there's an Egyptian EMI institution. First thing you can see is the balance between the two institutions in terms of the student participants is heavily weighted towards the partner. The UK students were acting as language facilitators within the project. So we had a relatively small number of them, which came from our BA and MAT style programs. So for those students, the motivation was to gain experience of, running international, EAP project within the university setting. The students from the partners were all first-year languages students. They were BA Applied Linguistics, but they were doing a first-year English language module, which I would describe as having EAP elements, but also having more of a focus on general language development, improving proficiency, developing communicative competence. So it wouldn't be necessarily what you would classify as an EAP module. And the tasks they were given, some of them had, you could describe as an EAP focus, so they were asked to discuss on certain topics. So some of them were around like education, the different sort of like styles of teaching and learning between the different countries they came from. Sorry, the students from the Egyptian partner institution, they're actually from a range of different countries. They weren't all Egyptian. Caroline has the full details, but she's not here. So some of the aspects of it you would classify as EAP, but other things were far more general, just things that we thought the students would be interested and engaged in. So things like music and like film, food and that kind of stuff. So it's really just to try to get them to engage and to use English was the purpose of it. Then at the end of it, they gave a presentation, and you can see some example presentations at the bottom. And the presentations were assessed as part of the English language module that they were taking within the partner institution. Okay, so that was the project I'd use as an example. So this is the kind of feedback from the participants. So you can see, generally, the thing that they were engaging in was the kind of cultural side of it, the intercultural communication. That was the thing that they found most interesting. The challenge, as we might expect, was the language and the communication side of things. Despite them finding it quite challenging, you can see that they actually were very engaged and they enjoyed it, and they would like to be involved in further projects. Again, that's I think I'm going colourblind. Is that blue or purple? The 72%. Yeah, sorry. And then some feedback from the facilitators, and obviously it's a good experience for, if you're MAT Sol student and you're looking to sort of maybe work within the university context, it's a good experience for you to sort of build on. So we can link this back to the graduate capital framework and think, so what's this project helped the students to achieve? Bear in mind that for the students in the TNE partner, they're only at the first year, so it's going to be a slow process of building up to these kind of competencies. And I think the first side, the human, social and cultural capital, that's sort of relatively easy to see how this kind of activity would help them to develop this. I think the things that interest me are the identity and psychological capital. So one thing is, like, being involved in a project like this, it helps them to start developing that narrative. If you think about, whenever we've all been in an interview, you need to give examples, don't you? You need to refer to things that you've done. And often a problem for graduates is that they don't have that example because they've not been in the world of work. So it gives them an example that they can refer to. It helps them to show how they've been involved in a complex international kind of project, really. And that's also about building psychological capital. So the project was pretty much left to the students, really, with the aid of the facilitators. So they were given a set of topics, they were given certain sort of times to meet, but then they had to organise themselves. They decided on what they would focus on. They used kind of peer correction with the facilitators to develop the presentations at the end of it. So they had to kind of navigate their process on their own, and it's difficult, as we all know, for a whole variety of reasons. So you can see from the feedback that they have successfully navigated it. It helps them to build that kind of resilience. Okay. So, as I said before, within our school and within our faculty, we've run a whole number of these different projects, and they cut across a range of different disciplines. Caroline, who's the international lead for our school, she's been more the one leading on this, so she'll be able to talk about it in more detail. But we have projects with journalism, publishing, filmmaking, and probably a couple more I've forgotten. So, but this was the kind of TESOL EAP English language project that we had. So all of this has been informing our thinking around developing potentially a JEI in China that we're working on. So I'll sort of show you how it looks like. The key thing is it's proposed at the moment. So fingers crossed. Maybe if it's not proposed, then I'm wasting your time. But hopefully, all going to plan, and it should come to be approved in the next few months. I suppose the thing that we were starting to think about here is the idea of the EAP-led curriculum design, the work integrated learning. That's a very big thing at Manchester Met. There's a particular focus on graduate outcomes. I'm sure it's the same in every institution. And how to integrate these sort of successful COIL projects that we had with various partners across various disciplines, but how that could inform a consistent approach across the curriculum. So it's not just the EAP curriculum, it's the content curriculum as well. The fact that Caroline and myself were in many ways the lead academics in this project, the fact that we both have a background in EAP and English language teaching, meant that we were able to advocate for the centrality of English language education throughout the curriculum as a whole, in a way that this will be hopefully be our second JEI. The other JEI is very much focused on science and engineering subjects, so it's driven by the academics in that area who aren't specialists in language education. So how you integrate English language into that context is maybe more challenging, whereas this one's focused more on communication degrees. So the idea would be, of course, the kind of 4-year degree. The first year you would have, I think it's becoming almost the standard model, the kind of ESAP module that brings the students into the institution. This would have COIL projects embedded within it though, and the idea there is also to help them, obviously with the communication skills, but also to help them to build that kind of sense of community within their subject areas. The second year, there would be compulsory they're sort of professional communication skills modules, which are part of the degree programme. So they count towards the Manchester Met degree, as well as the Chinese degree. They're really somewhere between, that's fine, 10 minutes, I'm done after this. They're really ESP and professional communication skills modules. So I wouldn't really describe them as EAP modules. And then that develops into the third year, where there's usually within the Manchester Met degrees compulsory sort of work placement or work integrated learning module that sits within each of the degree programmes. Obviously, the difference in the TNE context is there needs to be a focus. The idea is that they would be working in an international context, so there needs to be a focus on very specific workplace language. So that would be sort of co-delivered between subject specialists and the EAP staff. And then in the final year, there's the kind of career readiness, getting ready for what do you do after you graduate, where hopefully you can bring all these things together and work on the idea of the students being able to tell that narrative to potential employers. So that's the idea. What actually happens in reality, we don't know. Probably it won't look anything like that, but that's what we've been working on so far. So I'll just briefly summarise the rapid expansion. There it is again. It's a critical moment, and I think that it gives us the opportunity to consolidate EAP, or English language education, whatever we want to call it, essential to the student success and graduate outcomes. In order to do that, I think we have to start thinking beyond, outside maybe our traditional boundaries and kind of areas that we focus on, start to explore how we can have greater breadth and impact, and thinking about things like intercultural communication, digital literacies, development of graduate capital, actually is all something within the TNE context that is within our knowledge base and something that we can contribute to. And I think that within this there is that kind of opportunities there for practitioners, because we will be demonstrating our value in a critical area that's going to contribute to the success of the future of the institutions, and in a way that the universities that we work for can understand, and in a way that students will value. Okay, and I think that's all I have to say. So thank you very much for listening.